October 22nd, 1962. For one long week in early fall, the world came the closest it's ever been to nuclear warfare. What came to be known as the Cuban Missile Crisis began when the United States discovered the presence of Soviet-built missile bases on the island of Cuba.
The evidence is incontrovertible. Aerial cameras in American military reconnaissance planes made remarkable photographs, such as this one of a medium-range ballistic missile base, which documents the Soviet offensive buildup in Cuba. The Defense Department says there are 8 to 10 missile bases in Cuba.
The threat of a nuclear-armed Cuba was quickly recognized. Cabinet members, military and congressional leaders were summoned to meet with President John F. Kennedy. Cuba's secret missile bases were not the only concern. It was reported that Cuban dictator Fidel Castro wanted the U.S. naval base at Guantanamo. Fearing attack, dependents of armed forces personnel stationed at the base were withdrawn. 2,000 Marines were ordered in as reinforcements. In a televised address on October 22nd, President Kennedy warned that the missile bases would provide a nuclear strike capability against the Western Hemisphere and outlined his plan for a naval blockade.
To halt this offensive buildup, a strict quarantine on all offensive military equipment under shipment to Cuba is being initiated.
Kennedy warned that all ships bound for Cuba would be stopped and searched. Those found to have offensive weapons as part of their cargo would be turned back by force if necessary. Despite the warning, Khrushchev ordered his Navy ships to stay their course. The world anxiously watched as the high-powered showdown continued, with all-out nuclear disaster hanging in the balance. America held its collective breath as the president reiterated what was at stake.
It shall be the policy of this nation to regard any nuclear missile launched from Cuba against any nation in the Western Hemisphere as an attack by the Soviet Union on the United States, requiring a full retaliatory response upon the Soviet Union.
As the Soviet ships with their nuclear missiles cruised full steam ahead towards the U.S. naval blockade, the world braced itself for a deadly confrontation. In Washington, Kennedy's staff worked round the clock in an effort to prevent an inevitably devastating war. Due to the dire nature of the standoff, the president requested an emergency meeting of the United Nations.
General U Thant seeks to mediate the U.S.-Soviet crisis. While the U.S. agrees to talks, it stands firm for the removal of the offensive weapons. The Soviet representative, Valerian A. Zorin, announces he will veto a draft of a resolution introduced by the U.S. calling for the removal of the weapons. In Washington, the Organization of American States lines up almost unanimously behind President Kennedy's call for the blockade. This extraordinary session demonstrates the greatest Western Hemisphere solidarity since World War II.
Fearing that Khrushchev might give in to the increasing international pressure and abandon Cuba, Fidel Castro mobilized thousands of Cuban troops. As Castro was fighting to keep his new missiles, Khrushchev unexplainably relented to Kennedy's unflinching stance. In the 11th hour, the president received word that the Soviet premier agreed to all of his demands. The Soviet ships would turn back. As quickly as the crisis had begun, it was over. The Soviet leader had tested his younger counterpart and realized that Kennedy would not back down. In a test of wills, the world's two superpowers had squared off. And in the end, the Soviet Union blinked first.
Our goal is not the victory of might, but the vindication of right. Not peace at the expense of freedom, but both peace and freedom here in this hemisphere. And we hope around the world, God willing, that goal will be achieved.
Washington and the rest of the world will always remember breathing just a little easier on that last Sunday in October, 1962.